Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Gabriel Foley, Executive Director of Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, and your host today. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you afterward. We'll be putting links in the chat, but in case you miss them, please know that we'll be sending an email to everyone who registered that will contain all links referenced today, as well as a link to a recording. Automated captions are available for this webinar. You can turn them on by clicking on the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please submit any questions you have during the presentations using the Q&A box so we can better track those and get you the answers that you're looking for. Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, or MBCP, is a nonprofit organization working to conserve Maryland's birds and the habitats they rely on. At MBCP, we know that by working together, we can accomplish more than any one group can do alone. And that's why we emphasize partnerships and collaboration to improve the environment for both birds and people. Our goal is simple: move the needle on bird conservation. But we can't do that without your support. Please consider donating to MBCP via marylandbirds.org/donate. Your support will fund on-the-ground conservation, like our Farmland Raptor program that is installing and monitoring nest sites for some of our most vulnerable raptors, or our work with landowners in the Monocacy Grasslands Important Bird Area. Research, like using Maryland's Breeding Bird Atlas data to identify the most critical threats to our birds, and outreach, like Bird City Maryland, a recognition program that encourages conservation action. Together, we can make Maryland a better place for birds and show that small actions can have big impacts for birds. Visit marylandbirds.org/donate or scan the code on your screen with your phone. And thank you for caring about birds. And a special thank you to all the current MBCP supporters in the audience right now. I know there's quite a few of you, and you're making a difference for birds across Maryland every single day. For 5 years, dedicated Maryland birders collected data on breeding bird distributions from every corner of the state. What we found was that many of Maryland's most familiar birds, the ones that define our summer mornings and our backyard melodies, are shifting. Birds like northern flicker, Baltimore Oriole, and Eastern Towhee are showing declines in their breeding distributions, reflecting broader changes in habitat quality and landscape connectivity. The good news is that the same places where these birds are disappearing are also places where we have real influence. Yards, neighborhoods, and community spaces collectively make up a substantial portion of Maryland's habitat. By prioritizing native plants, reducing or eliminating pesticide use, and thinking more intentionally about how we manage these spaces, we can improve the condition these birds depend on. At these local scales, it's the small decisions that matter. Things like what you plant, how you maintain your lawn, or whether you leave your space just a little wilder. And as more people collectively contribute to more wildlife-friendly spaces, the impact scales up. This webinar focuses on one additional, often overlooked piece of the habitat puzzle: visibility. Conservation efforts that are tucked away in backyards are effective and provide the habitat birds need, but they miss an opportunity to inspire broader change. Bringing these actions from our backyards out into our front yards amplifies their impact and invites conversations, builds community norms, and helps neighbors see what's possible. By making bird-friendly habitat visible, we not only support birds directly, but we also help grow a network of people committed to sustaining Maryland's everyday biodiversity. Our panelists today spotlight Becca and Christine. Becca Rodomsky-Bish is the project leader for Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Garden for Birds program. Her background is in environmental education, and she initially came to Cornell Lab through a project called Habitat Network that taught people about creating habitat at home to better support birds and other wildlife. Building on that, Cornell Lab has created the Garden for Birds program that helps guide people into taking action at home and in their community to better support birds and biodiversity. Dr. Christine Morano Magee is a member of MBCP's board and director of education at Dumbarton Oaks Park Conservancy. At Dumbarton Oaks, she develops innovative outdoor education curricula and oversees dynamic programming that connects learners of all ages to nature and conservation. Dr. McGee is also a certified Maryland Master Naturalist, Master Gardener, DC Weed Warrior, and an active member of University of Maryland's Ask Extension program. She's widely recognized for her expertise on invasive plants and lectures at numerous local universities on the importance of native plant restoration. And I'm Gabriel Foley, Executive Director of Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, and the former coordinator of the Maryland and DC Breeding Bird Atlas, which is what I'm going to discuss here. The Atlas was a 5-year project from 2020 to 2024 that was funded by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the Maryland Ornithological Society. MBCP's role is to analyze the dataset and to ensure that it's used to guide bird conservation decisions here in Maryland. So, what is an atlas? You have a world atlas, you have a road atlas, and you have a breeding bird atlas. It's a mapping project, and it maps out the distributions of all our breeding birds. The key thing for an atlas is this grid that you see on the slide here. The grid covers Maryland and DC, and it's made up of 1,300 3 by 3 mile blocks. Over 5 years, volunteers go into each of those blocks and they document all of the breeding birds they're able to find. This was the third of 3 Atlas projects in Maryland and DC. There was also one in the 80s and one in the 2000s. After the data are collected, you have detailed distribution maps for each of the region's breeding species. This one is for barred owl. The blank blocks show where no one was able to find a barred owl over the 5 years. And the different shades of green in each of the blocks show different levels of breeding evidence that was found for barred owls in those blocks. The project is focused on breeding birds, so determining whether a bird is breeding or not is important. You can find the nest, but birds are good at hiding their nests, so that can be a challenge. Instead, we use the bird's behavior, and we categorize it based on how strong that behavior reflects breeding. For example, here is a singing dark-eyed junco. This is a bird that is singing, which is something males do to defend territory or attract a mate, but it's not very strong evidence of breeding. It's more like a bird that's at the right place at the right time. We categorize this as possible breeding. Here's a ruffed grouse who is quite upset at me. We would call this an agitated bird, and her chicks were actually just off the side of the trail there. This would be categorized as probable breeding. It's stronger evidence than a bird that's in the right place at the right time, but you still haven't confirmed anything. Compare that to this blue-headed vireo with a chick in the nest. This is the ultimate breeding evidence, and we would categorize that as confirmed breeding. So, based on the behavior you find, you have possible, probable, and confirmed breeding statuses. Now, one other thing I want to be clear about is that I'm going to be showing you some maps using data from the Atlas, but these maps all show raw data. The data have not been analyzed. Here on this slide is a collection of all the locations where volunteers reported breeding birds from. You can see we really did get into every corner of Maryland. We had over 120,000 hours of volunteer effort go into this project. It's truly amazing. But here's another way to look at that effort, where each hour of effort is allocated to its block. The brighter the color, the more effort that was in the block. And you can see there's quite a difference between blocks, and that affects how many birds were found. The longer that you look for birds, the more birds you're going to find. So, when we analyze the data, we will account for this effort to ensure that the distributions of each species are independent of these effort biases. This analysis has not been done yet. I'm only showing you the raw data. So here's a map from the Atlas data that shows the distribution of breeding wood thrush in Maryland and DC. I'm going to walk you through all of the information on this slide because the next several slides all have the same format. So at the top, you have a map that's rotating through 1, 2, 3. Those numbers represent the different Atlas projects. And you can see those projects in the top left corner. So one is the 80s, two is the 2000s, and three is the 2020s. So 1, 2, 3, and it just progresses through time from the 80s to the 2020s. Each of the blank blocks in the map are where the bird was never found during that project, while the light green represents possible breeding, like a singing bird. The middle shade of green represents probable breeding, like an agitated bird. And the darkest shade of green represents confirmed breeding, like a nest. In the bottom right, you have an image of the bird, and in the bottom left, you have a bar chart that shows how many blocks the bird was found in during each project, 80s, 2000s, 2020s, 1, 2, 3. The height of the bar represents how many blocks it was found in. So you can see wood thrush were found in almost 1,200 blocks in the first two projects, but they've dropped quite a bit in the third project. There's also labels on top of the bars, and that shows the percent change in blocks compared to the previous project. So in the 2000s, wood thrush actually increased by almost 2% in the number of blocks they were found in, but they've decreased by 8% in the last 20 years. This slide shows gray catbird. These are a very familiar backyard bird. They love nesting in shrubby thickets and they love eating jelly. If you put out some jelly in a jelly feeder, we usually put out strawberry jelly, but I'm not sure the fruit matters very much. You can see that catbirds have remained pretty stable in Maryland, with a slight drop of about 4% this time around. One thing that concerns me here is that in general, the more common a bird is, the more likely it is to be confirmed. You have more opportunities to confirm them by finding a nest or chicks or something. So when there is a lot of dark green on a map, it's a good indication the bird is abundant there. And if you look carefully, you'll notice that the number of confirmed blocks on the eastern shore and in southern Maryland really decrease in the third atlas, which may indicate that abundance is dropping in those locations. We will do a relative abundance analysis using the Atlas dataset, and that will give us more quantitative information. But for now, I do have concerns about catbirds on the shore and in southern Maryland. This slide shows hummingbirds in Maryland. We only have the one species, the ruby throat, and these guys are so tiny, the way they're often reported to the atlas is actually through activity at hummingbird feeders. The change between the first and second atlases is likely due to an increase in hummingbird feeders. A lot of the blocks that had new reports of hummingbirds in the 2000s were urban or agricultural blocks, which lines up with that theory. Now, they've seen a slight 5% decrease, which is worrying because there's more feeders than ever and reporting them is easier than ever. Fortunately, there are some fairly simple things you can do in your yard to help these little guys out, both during the breeding and the migration seasons. And Becca and Christine are going to tell you more about that. This slide shows one of our most common sparrows, the song sparrow. Although a lot of folks even pretty informed birders don't actually realize how scarce song sparrows can be during the breeding season on the lower shore. Uh, I I think that little change in distribution is really cool and pretty unexpected. You can find them in the marshy areas, but it's hard and there really aren't many of them. They remain perfectly stable between the first two atlases, but there's a 5% drop in the last 20 years. And unfortunately, this seems to be a bit of a theme with our very common birds, where they were stable between the two prior atlases and then showed a decrease this time around. This is especially concerning to me because song sparrows are an exceptionally adaptable bird. They're found across the continent, just about everywhere you go. If a bird like the song sparrow is declining, even just a little, we should be sitting up and paying attention to what might be driving that. Chimney swifts are a bird that is declining across North America at a fairly concerning rate. They've actually been listed as a tipping point species by the Road to Recovery organization, which means that their population trends are at a point where if we can do some work now, we can prevent the species from becoming a real conservation concern. On the other hand, if we don't do anything, they're on a pretty grim trajectory. One of the unusual things about chimney swifts is how connected they are to people. Even their name shows this. In Maryland, they almost exclusively nest inside chimneys. And so, if you're lucky enough to have a chimney that can be used by a swift, I'd encourage you to keep it open for them. Capping a chimney prevents the swifts from using it, and then lining a chimney also prevents the swifts from being able to cling to the chimney sides. This slide shows northern flickers, a woodpecker that actually kind of prefers to eat ants on the ground. They're super cool birds, and somehow they make stripes, polka dots, and a mustache really work. They're really interesting because every other woodpecker in Maryland showed an increase in distribution in this last atlas, but they had about a 10% decrease, which is fairly substantial. On top of that, the decrease is almost entirely focused on the Eastern Shore and in southern Maryland. If you want to help provide habitat for flickers, you can put up a nest box for them, or even better, if you have an older tree in your yard, you can leave the trunk up as a snag for them to nest and feed on. Here's another bird, the Eastern Towhee, that is showing a pretty substantial drop, also mostly on the shore. These birds really like having thick undergrowth around forest areas to nest in. If you live near forest, this is a bird that you can help support in your yard by having shrubby thickets or even piles of sticks and other yard waste. We've got a pretty good brush pile going on in our backyard. Their song is one of my favorites as well. That little drink your tea phrase that they sing. And they have this lovely little weep call that they give all year round. They're just such lovely little birds. And here's the last one I'm going to show you, the Baltimore Oriole. Um, fun fact about Baltimore Orioles is that they were not named after the city of Baltimore. They were actually named after Lord Baltimore because his family flag was black and orange. Of course, Baltimore was also named after Lord Baltimore, so the bird and the city are still connected. I think this decrease is really sad. Baltimore Orioles, they used to be an uncommon, localized breeding bird on the lower shore, but they have entirely disappeared from there and are becoming more scarce across the eastern shore and in southern Maryland. So that's an overview of how some of our most familiar birds are faring here in Maryland. Next, we will hear from Becca about how birds are doing at a larger scale than just Maryland, and importantly, how you can help with whatever space you have access to. Thank you so much, and welcome, Becca.
Great. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you for those slides. I really enjoyed watching all of the Atlas data that I'm assuming some people on this call perhaps were very engaged in participating in. Well, it's an honor to be here tonight. Thank you for inviting me, Gabriel and Margaret. It's a pleasure to be able to share some of this work from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. As Gabriel mentioned, I manage a new project at the lab called Garden for Birds, which I'll talk a little bit about as we go. I'm the project leader for the Great Backyard Bird Count as well, which many of you perhaps have been participants of in the past. If so, thank you. Your contributions to citizen science, participatory science is so valuable, and you'll see some of that work at play tonight. So gardening is my personal passion. I'm a big habitat gardener, and a big farmer actually as well. And so I love that I can bring this work into my day-to-day job at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. We are officially in our second year with the Garden for Birds project, and this is a participant that is based in Maryland. I tried to use Maryland images as much as I could tonight. And this really inspired me. This is a gardener who is gardening in their front yard, as the topic and theme notes tonight. And she's a pretty advanced gardener. She's been gardening for a long time, but joined our project and shared her experience with us. And this is a picture of her garden later in the season. And you can see, not a native plant purist, but has natives integrated with some of the other flowers and greenery that they like to grow. And I loved that the comment from this particular person was that the gardening with birds in mind and biodiversity in mind made them more intentional. And they were rewarded with a lot of butterfly and bird sightings all season long. So this theme of being able to garden with some intention, where you're thinking about the biodiversity that those spaces support, is really valuable and is one of the main actions that we can really engage in as we try to protect and conserve spaces for birds. And kind of stepping back for a minute, this is not news, but I just want to kind of ground us in why this work is important. When you think about landscape from a bird's perspective, it's becoming increasingly subdivided and fractured and broken up, right? It doesn't really matter what kind of habitat birds require. This is what the landscape continues to move towards. And so all of those little patches that do exist still, that we generally as humans have some authority over doing something with, can really be put to use for birds in a very valuable way. And so I always tell people no space is too small. When birds are looking down at a landscape like this, they know that the patches are few and far between, and they're going to be searching for the patches that can really support them in the best way possible, which is where some of our choices and actions can come into play. And Gabriel alluded to this very clearly in the Atlas work, is birds are in trouble. This is a graph from the state of the most recent 2025 State of the Birds report. And the circled birds there, eastern forest birds, shorebirds, and I would say your grassland birds, several of them you guys also did census on, they're in trouble. We're seeing real declines, and this should concern us because birds can really tell us a lot about what's going on in our ecosystems, and the fact that they're declining should be a warning bell that things are not working out well and we need to take some action. In terms of the science and the data that the Cornell Lab in particular has done, and many other organizations, including Maryland's, there's a lot of reasons for these declines, and some of the reasons are species specific, but there are general parallels and patterns that we're seeing. Really, the number one leading cause is habitat destruction and degradation. Birds just have a lot less space in order to get access to what they need to survive and thrive. Putting a number on that's very difficult, but scientists have pretty conclusively said birds are losing habitat, and that's a big contribution to the losses that we're seeing. Second to that is about 2 billion birds are killed every year from free roaming cats. They are predators. It's not their fault. They're beautiful. I have a cat, but they do kill birds when they're allowed to sort of free roam, and that is also affecting bird populations. And then third is windows. Windows can be real killers. We don't have a solid number on that, but at least 1 billion birds a year die from colliding with windows because they can't see them. That glass doesn't allow them they see the glass as whatever sometimes the habitat is that it's reflecting off of it. So making windows visible would go a long way to helping birds. So these are kind of the top three causes of mortality that we've been able to identify. And those of you that like maps and graphs, this is some of the work that participatory scientists that submit to eBird. We've been able to create pretty accurate depictions of where birds are when using status and trend models and graphics, which is what this is here. So thank you. If you have ever eBirded, your data is on here and has allowed us to really understand where birds are when. And this is data specific to the ruby-crowned kinglet, which is a songbird that is seen in Maryland and moves through Maryland and in many ways, in many places, actually overwinters in Maryland. Um, and what's neat about these graphics is that we can really begin to get fine-tuned at where birds are when they're moving, and what their abundance are. So the darker the purple color here, the more birds. The lighter the orange and yellow are fewer birds, but still present. And then you can see in the breeding season, they're up in their breeding habitats, usually further north, and then they move and migrate further south. Being able to understand this does a couple of things. It helps us with conservation questions, especially with species that we're trying to pay close attention to. But what it also does is it makes us feel like we are all a part of these patterns and trends of birds and how they move across our landscape. And these birds need resources no matter where they are. So being able to see how they move through landscape to me personally makes me feel empowered that I can be a part of helping these birds and a part of their story because at some point in the season, many of them are moving through my area. And then I won't spend too much time on this because you all are experts with the Breeding Bird Atlas, but I would say that the data that we saw tonight really aligns with what we know in terms of eBird data, status, and trends. The birds are decreasing in certain areas. These are four that were all mentioned from Gabriel as well. We're seeing decreases in different areas and we're seeing increases in different areas. So actual movement trends that are happening with these birds. The reasons are obviously very complex and sometimes they're even species specific. But one of the things I like to point out that helps empower me, and I hope a lot of others in terms of thinking about habitat and gardening, is that all of these birds forage on insects, certainly during breeding season, right? Because all of these birds feed their young insects. And many of these birds are eating insects in other periods of their life cycle as well. So when we think about our gardens, we can think about them not just as foraging and habitat for birds, but actually literally raising the food that these species are going to be dependent on. So garden for birds. The real sort of crux of this vision and idea is helping to empower people to actually take action in ways that they have tangible control and authority over. And I find a lot of hope in this because there's many aspects of bird conservation and environmental degradation that we really can't do much about as individuals. And we know that birds really need large scale land preservation and rehabilitation. That's definitely true. But we can all be a little stepping stone and a part of that bigger story because what we do at home and on whatever property we can have an impact. And this is a patio garden again in Maryland. I just love what this person did with their space. This is one season, and all of that greenery and seed heads and nectar that they provided just in the space that they had available, they were attracting hummingbirds and finches. We really can use our landscapes in whatever part we have authority over to provide some form of habitat. And a bird may land and get a little nectar that pushes it on to the place that it's going to raise young. Maybe it's heading south to its nesting season. It's going to stop over and get some really valuable late season insects or seed heads. So thinking about our places as a part of a bigger landscape is really empowering, and we can do a lot with a little space. This is somebody who I've been working with for a couple of years as we've been building this project. Homeowner in Florida, big e-birder. And this is their front yard, basically, in 2019. And they travel all over Florida recording birds. And they kind of realized one day, we only see 37 different species in our yard. We know there's lots more around because we've been birding and we've seen them. So what can we do to maybe bring those birds closer and provide space for them? So they began a renovation project of their front yard. They added a really nice privacy fence there that you can see that's low, and then they just packed it full of native habitat, trees, shrubs, perennials, you name it, grasses. They packed it in there, and you can see using their eBird data here that we were able to graph the immense increase in the amount of different types of species of birds that they see in and around their own property, more than 4 times. And I find this so inspiring because this is real-time data. This is real-time impact that you can see using your own property based on the changes. And the black line there is sort of is the demarker for when the habitat restoration work began. Gradual increases over time, really impressive. We want this story to be everybody's story. And the changes that you make can really lead us in this direction, which I think Christine's going to talk about her own journey with that too. So as far as Garden for Birds, we try to keep our activities relatively doable, and we try to make it a way to spark action in terms of supporting birds, both through adding native habitat as well as other bird-friendly features that we can do in and around our homes. We run it during the growing season, and as you can imagine, that's broad because we are trying to reach people throughout the United States and Canada. So what's happening in February in Arizona, for example, is probably vastly different than what's happening in Alaska, and we speak to that by trying to touch people with different things and recommendations based on the regions that they're in. Throughout the growing season, we'll invite people to share photos. We offer several webinars to help expand people's thinking about this type of work, to deepen their knowledge. And then we do have an eBird project, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a minute, so that we can have more people being able to do what that Florida homeowner depicted, that I was able to depict with their data and their images. And here are some pictures. Many of these are Maryland folks, some folks who I think are on the call tonight. All different scales of habitat creation happening here, right? You have sort of that center image where they've been going at this for a while. They've been adding and subtracting habitat to try to make it more friendly for birds. Some people just add a plant, and that is the one ask. We just say every year you need to add at least one native plant into your landscape. More the merrier, but start with one or just add one if you already have a lot of habitat. And then, renovations that were brand new that people are engaged in, but just trying to create this spirit and momentum. Very similar, and we're very much aligned and in partnership with Homegrown National Park, that we really can create private properties that do feed and support biodiversity. And in fact, we need to do that because private landscapes are much more significant in this day and age. So we can't just rely on national and state and so forth parks. We need to be doing this work in our properties too. And one of the threads of this work that is a little bit unique is that we're measuring some social science data along with the biological data. So, as you all perhaps are very well aware, shifting the landscape philosophy can be difficult, right? Getting people to move away from a lawnscape, for example, and embracing more of a habitat ethic and aesthetic is a behavior change. So asking people to do that can be difficult. So we're measuring some social science in this project along the way. And one question we really are curious about is how do we spread this effect? How do we create social contagion with habitat creation? So this past year, we distributed about 643 signs across the United States. We called them bird spot signs, and they had a QR code. So if they were scanned in the places with which they were up, and you probably saw a few in the images that I've already shared, people can learn about what a bird spot is, why it's important, etc. And we're doing metrics around these signs. So where are they getting scanned? And then we're also asking sign people to share with us what their experience has been. Now we're in the middle of analyzing the data from last year, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek, but it is not conclusive. We're still kind of deep in our analysis. But this was a question that we asked people that only had signs to tell us the extent to which the new sign was noticed by others. So there were about 365 people who shared this data, and really interesting to see some hints here at social contagion, right? More than 50% discussed the sign with family and friends. Again, not that social contagion's happening, but sort of a hint that it might be influencing other people. It was noticed by people that were walking by and reading the sign. People were asked about the sign, and this is the one that is really interesting, is the discussion with neighbors. As many people know, neighbor kind of relationships can be difficult when we start to make these landscape changes that are sort of different from the norm or the societally accepted, green, well-trimmed lawn. So really interesting to see that neighbors are being influenced by these signs is the direction that we're hoping to see this go. And then this particular question was a little broader. This was to anybody doing the survey, and I did forget to mention that a part of our Garden for Birds is survey work to try to understand people's experience as it relates to this. And this question was, I think garden signs can inspire others to create native habitat. And we found this fascinating, that more than 70% of people that responded to this question thought either that this was they agreed with the statement or they strongly agreed. So very interesting to see that we're already seeing some signs that perhaps signage can be a cue to care and can ultimately influence sort of the social contagion of people embracing more of a bird-friendly native habitat landscape. Again, we're still preliminary in our analysis, but more to come on that. And then another piece of this project is the data, the bird data. We have a new project called Garden for Birds. The concept of projects is very new to eBird. Many of you that maybe do iNaturalist know about the concept of projects. eBird is experimenting with this as a way to help people, such as projects like ours, be able to pull data together and aggregate it and be able to look at it more intimately with a certain mission or vision. And this map shows the distribution of our current participants. It's really exciting to see how we have pretty good coverage already, but we, of course, want more data because we can tell more things with more data. So we have about 250 or so people across the United States and Canada who are participating in the eBird project and sharing the birds that they're seeing in and around their gardens and homes and communities. If you yourself are an eBirder and you want to share and be a part of sharing this data with us, the code is down there at the bottom of the screen. And I can also share. It's also available on our website if you are not able to write down that code now. But the eBird project is really exciting. Obviously, the long-term goal is to be able to point habitat changes with bird data and changes in what people are seeing, the numbers of birds, etc. We know that on smaller scales and anecdotally that this is true, right? The research that Doug Ptolemy's done, Desiree Naranjo's done, Christine is going to speak to her changes in birds. We know that this happens, but we don't have enough data to understand the scale. And so, in order to sort of tell the story in a richer way, we need more bird data. So I hope that you're walking away from everybody's portions of the talk tonight with some inspiration that you can be a part of this work. We all have a role to play. We can all have some kind of tangible effect on birds with the choices that we're making. The top image is actually the picture behind me. This is one of my gardens. We can all put plants in the ground that are better choices for birds, native plants. We can all keep our furry, beautiful felines happy with sunshine, but also protected for themselves and the birds by building catios, keeping them indoors, etc. And all of us have the capacity to make windows more visible to birds so that we are not losing them with collisions. So thank you tonight for being a part of this work. If you are interested in Garden for Birds and want to join us and be a part of this group of people, that is the website there, gardenforbirds.org, and my email. And I'm excited to hear Christine, who is gardening for birds, and hearing her personal story as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Becca. That was fantastic. I've got so many questions. I could have listened to you talk about that for an hour. It was really super. And just as a reminder, we will send out the links that Becca mentioned, including the link to the Garden for Birds project and the eBird project as well after the webinar recording wraps up. We are now going to hear from Christine, and she's going to share some of the things that she has done in her own yard. So take it away, Christine.
Okay. Am I there?
I see you. Uh,
Okay. Um, so I want to thank Becca and Gabriel for sort of teeing up what I'm going to talk about. And they talked about the urgency of this. And as a Maryland resident, it's been very interesting to take this journey of looking at our yard and seeing what we can do to help birds and create habitat. Um, so the reason that I got into gardening is really through birds. Birds led me to be eco-minded, and I realized that my yard had potential, and I found a robust group of different organizations and people in the state of Maryland that can help, that was were able to help my husband and I create bird habitat at home. Um,
Christine, just checking, have you shared your slides yet? Do you have slides that you are
oh,
presenting
I'm
on quite
looking at them and sharing them. Sorry about that.
yet? No problem.
It,
I see your wonderful face, but not your
okay,
slides yet.
let's see if we could get this shared quickly.
I know you've got some really good photos to show, so
Yeah, I
don't want to
do.
miss those.
Okay, are we there?
There we go.
Okay,
And then if just start sharing or start the slideshow.
it says I'm sharing.
Yep. I see your slides and perfect.
Okay,
Looks awesome.
um, so sorry I didn't have the slides up, but we got into birding. And then we got into gardening, and we realized that what we put in our yard is going to bring birds in. And all of the photos in this presentation are from our yard. Um, and we realized that gardening for the birds is a 4-season project, and it goes on forever, and it's really fun. Why invite birds to your yard? And I think Gabriel and Becca went over all of this, not only for a love of birds, but that the bird population is declining, habitat loss, pesticide use. Um, and then we realized that our yard could become a mini conservation area. And we started nesting bluebirds on our property. We had no idea if it would work or not. We put up now we have 7 boxes, and we fledged over 200, probably 50 bluebirds, Eastern bluebirds. And these are all photos. They've brought us so much joy. So creating habitat, you really need to understand the potential of your yard. And I took a course through University of Maryland called The Woods in Your Backyard. And even if you don't have woods in your backyard, it's a great course to take. I did not have woods in my backyard. We live on a piece of property that used to be farmland, so it was all turf. And they asked us to draw a sketch and start taking notes about the sun and the shade and the soil type, the hard surfaces, the drainage surfaces. And this really dictated where we started planting and what we started planting. And once we understood our yard, we said, okay, how can we make it bird friendly? So we realized we had all this turf, so we put in mini meadows. And mini meadows are very easy to do. They're HOA friendly. If you put your entire front lawn as a meadow, you may get in trouble with an HOA. But if you take a patch and you put in native plants that are beautiful and flowers, no one's going to complain. And we started little by little replacing our turf with patches of mini meadows. And once established, they're low maintenance. So, why native plants? That's really important. And I think Becca touched on this, but it's really important for the birds because birds are extremely specific in what they eat, and they need their native food. They need their local food. And the same thing along with the food is what nesting materials they use. So they need you to plant local flowers, native flowers, so that they can find food as well as materials for shelter and shelter in the trees and shrubs and plants that are native. Um, so native plants equal bird food and they create a food web. Here's an example of just a small patch of natives that we put in that are what you want to do is sort of succession plants. So you have things blooming and offering food in late spring, early summer, mid spring, late summer, and then fall and winter. And I suggest leaving your flowers and your native plants all winter. Don't weed your garden. Don't take out these plants. Leave them, and the seed heads will feed birds throughout the winter. Have fun exploring what plants and why. And the goal is once again a year-round benefit. And I just showed a few plants that we put in. Here are shrubs and trees. An oak is always worth planting. It benefits, it's a keystone species and benefits thousands of kinds of moths and butterflies. It attracts so many birds, and it is just a large, beautiful shade tree that could be a centerpiece of your yard. Winter holly is winter food. Spice bush provides migration food and also is the host, again, very specific. Insects are very specific too. The eastern tiger swallowtail butterflies use the spice bush as their host. Serviceberry is the caterpillars that are attracted to it provide food for baby birds. And value added in your yard, put in a water feature. It could be as simple as a shallow basin of water. Add a simple solar fountain. They're very inexpensive and a heating element in the winter. And we had this is an example at the bottom. The picture is cedar waxwings that were migrating, just came in and just spent all day on our bird bath one day. It was an amazing sight to see. Um, so we also installed a simple rain garden. They don't have to be complicated. This is an actual picture at the top of rainwater from a neighbor's yard. They were doing construction and they clear cut quite a bit of trees down. And we ended up with, when they took away the construction fence, we were completely flooded. And we put in rain gardens to slowly capture and absorb the runoff. We use native plants. And interesting thing about native plants, they have deeper root systems than non-native plants. They have evolved to control the stormwater that you get locally. They filter out pollutants and they support the insect and bird population. And it's very easy things to do. Um, and here are the steps to putting in a simple rain garden. You just choose a low-lying area that needs drainage. You observe and make sure that's where the place is that you need it. You excavate a shallow basin. You create a berm on the downside of the hill, include an overflow route, layer in rocks and gravel, improve soil, and compost over the top, and install native plants and mulch lightly. It was a very simple thing to do. It made it, when everybody talked about rain gardens, it sounded so complicated. And in some counties, you can get a rebate for putting in a rain garden. So certainly look into that. And native rain garden, again, when you put in a rain garden, there's a tree in here, there's rushes, there's flowers. So you want to put a variety, including a tree, so that you really are mitigating storm water. Um, and you want it to look nice. And all of these different plants and trees give it an aesthetic that you want to have in your yard, and yet at the same time, it is working to absorb stormwater. Use your dead tree wood to create new life. These are all projects we did. We left a snag standing, and wow, we have so many woodpeckers now. And lo and behold, a new tree grew up within the old locust tree. Amazing. We used down tree trunk to create an obstacle course and a seating area for our grandkids, and they love it. We created a composting wall using sticks and twigs and branches. This also mitigates stormwater. The birds love it. Um, and we leave plants in standing and leaf litter, as I said, to overwinter. Um, and the birds are all over our yard in the winter. We don't rake our leaves. And we create stick pots, which are just pots with you take dead twigs and sticks and branches and put it in your yard over the winter so that the insects have a place to live in the winter. So those are a few things we did. And how did we find out how to do all this? Well, Ask Extension is amazing. They will answer any at University of Maryland, they will answer any question you have about gardening. We I'm a part of the Baywise program, but we also got our yard Baywise certified, and that's how I found out about the program. It's open to all people who live in the Chesapeake Bay watershed in Maryland, whether you have a traditional yard, an apartment balcony. And they give you a checklist of what you need to do. They guide you through it, and you can get certified. And again, it is gardening for the bay, but it's also gardening for birds. Become a master gardener, but also confide in your master gardeners. They're wonderful and very helpful. And all of these links are on our organization's website. Um, Become a master naturalist. They have a broad viewpoint, and it's a wonderful experience. But you can also call upon master naturalists to talk about your yard and how you can reforest things. As I said, I took the Woods in Your Backyard Stewardship Program, part of University of Maryland. Great program. And finally, as a board member of MBCP, I invite you to get involved, to go to our website. You'll see all of the ways you can actually not only support birds, but also how you can look at your lawn, your property, your balcony as a way to attract birds. So we hope that you will get involved and garden for the birds. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was fantastic. Um, we have a couple of minutes for questions. I think we can probably do one or two here. We had one question come in through the chat. Are there any home renovation guidance for habitat, like masonry for chimney swifts or hollow bricks? Becca, do you want to take that one?
That's a really interesting question. I am not an expert on chimney swift uh, the way that they should be constructed, but I do know that some of the newer construction chimneys are not conducive to chimney swifts, and that's part of the challenge. Is sometimes the new design and architecture isn't as welcoming. And I think Gabriel, you actually had more ideas about this than I did. But if you are renovating and you are adding a chimney, I would do some pretty serious research about more of a traditional chimney design instead of what probably builders would want to do is more of the kind of cutting edge style. But that actually isn't as conducive to chimney swifts. That is about the extent of my expertise in that area.
The one thing that I'll also add to that is that you might have seen the hollow bricks being used for swifts. That's mostly a European thing. Their swifts nest differently than ours do. So it doesn't work over here, unfortunately. I think I've got time for one more question. Christine, um, if I don't have a lot of space in my yard, what are, say, the top three herbaceous plants that give the biggest bang for your buck here in Maryland?
Well, it really depends upon whether your yard is shady or sunny. And um, I would recommend really going to the University of Maryland website that's on our we have a link on our website. And because it also depends upon your soil. I mean, it's not just like people recommend plants all the time. And I could say, like I said, put in an oak tree, but not everybody can put in an oak tree. So you really want to be very specific about what you choose to plant because you may put in an oak tree and then 10 years from now, that oak tree is too big for your yard. Or so definitely, um, I'm not trying to skirt the answer. I'm just saying you have to do research and you have to be very selective on what you decide to put in your yard.
All right. Well, thank you again, Christine, Becca. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. All registrants will receive a link to the recording and all links shared via email in just a few days. Again, the conservation efforts that you've heard about today are only possible thanks to MBCP supporters like you who care about birds and believe in MBCP's mission to conserve them. Um, will you help share the message that that small actions can lead to big impacts with Marylanders by making a gift to support MBCP now? You'll be directly supporting the critical conservation efforts MBCP is engaged in and help us share the message that that our small actions really do have big impacts. Visit marylandbirds.org/donate, scan the code on your screen with your phone, or give via the secure donation form that you'll likely be redirected to after today's presentation ends. Thank you so much for caring about birds and good birding.